without doubts, I think it's by far the best league in Europe.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League?
Mission accomplished in the Premier League. The American
Scouser.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of ASTV's Premier League show. We are here on February 3rd. We survived the weekend that was. We survived Groundhog's Day. For those of you who didn't drink last month, you survived dry January. We have gotten to February, which is, if I were ever going to do a dry month, Paul, it would definitely be February because there's only 28 days, and I definitely wouldn't do it in that leap year. Then again, I probably wouldn't try to do a dry anything because no one's seen me on this channel without a beer.
I was going to do a dry month. I'd pick a different presidency. That's for damn sure.
Well, yeah, I would definitely have done it in a different quadrant of years. And if I had tried it a few years back, I sure as hell wouldn't have went for it again. But that's a conversation for a different day. Let's get into the weekend's action. We're going to start with the matches that did transpire. A little different format for tonight's show, and we'll talk about it as we get there. But big weekend here, full slate of matches. Everybody played. All 10 fixtures on the screen, Paul. There were a few really high-profile matches. Obviously, Manchester City getting drubbed by Arsenal was one of them. Liverpool-Bournemouth, probably more of a surprise marquee matchup of the match weekend of the fixtures. And then Everton just continuing to throttle. And I don't know who says more about Forest or Brighton. Why don't we start? I think we'd be remiss not to start with a 7-0 drubbing by a team that we all question would be able to score when the season started. So Forest 7, Brighton 0. The proverbial question, Paul, more about Forest, more about Brighton's issues.
Oh, I think it's the steal the Jamie quote. That's a tough one. I think it's a little bit of everything. And I think when we look at this, to me, I like the entire time I was watching this match, I just had the Jordan meme popping up where like, and I took that personally. Like clearly they did not like what happened to Bournemouth. And so if I'm a manager and I see this, like, could you ask for more of a response from your side? Like, would you get drilled, 6-0 versus another rival on the table? I thought the response was great. I thought Brighton looked woeful. I think when you look on the year, they have they have a negative XG. When you look at their verse XG, which you would never think from a Brighton side, they're always so positive. So it is very clear that there's something that fundamentally is broken and not working offensively for this side. Not to take anything away from Forest, but I think Brighton's been that poor and that when I look at the quality in that side, I don't know if there's a more disappointing side in the league from when we looked at like the beginning of the season, looked at quality and where we expected them to be. I'm not sure there's a more disappointing side. Maybe you could say City, but they're in terms of what we expected out of Brighton, that we just, it's not the Brighton side we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think they probably are the most disappointing side. I think for some people, that really believe Palace was going to be like a team that pushed for Europe, maybe just for how poor they started, but they've almost turned that around and righted that ship, which is, and it kind of makes sense. You turn over players, you finally get an influx of a little bit more talent, which means you need guys to bet in. You lose your best player in Elise, and then you also, maybe your second best player or maybe your second most influential player down the stretch of last year and a player you were planning to build this season's campaign around, and Adam Wharton really went off the boil and is just now starting to get back to some of that high level form he showed last year and over the summer with England. So, I don't disagree. Brighton was pretty woeful. I will say you got to give a lot of credit to Forest, to your point. Give credit to the players, give credit to Nuno for getting that team to respond. They're still very tricky to play against, obviously. What more can you say other than Chris Wood? Alanga with a hat trick of assists. You got Nico Williams getting everybody's getting in on this thing. It they are having fun, and they're almost taking the piss out of everyone who was like, "Oh, give them till Christmas, and they'll be, out of Europe."
Yep.
You know, it'd take a pretty big collapse at this point in a lot of ways, and a couple other teams going on big, strong runs for them to fall out of at least guaranteed Europa League spots, top six. But I think they have a legitimate shot to fight for the top five and potentially make it into the Champions League. Let's look at.
Say we talk about how like the bottom three are like dropping out, right? We're getting the same three relegated. Like the one thing that's nice about this is to see like it does feel good and sound good to hear about Forest being back in Europe, right? Like, I mean, it feels like old blood again there. So
I think the idea that you have Forest, Bournemouth, and Villa all fighting for European places, and Newcastle fighting for European places, and hearing names like Chelsea and City are really going to have to put their, results together to get there, and that United and Tottenham are ultimately at a point where they need to win the Europa League to qualify for Europe next year, because neither one of them is really going to have a chance of getting into the European places. I think it's a good sign for the Premier League. I think it's also a sign of what is changing in the Premier League and why it's so hard for a club like United and Spurs, who have ultimately gotten it wrong for a few years in a row. So let's talk here quickly about United. 2-0 loss, another howler from Onana. How much longer can the manager stick with this keeper, or is the backup just as unreliable that he probably just goes with the guy who costs more money, maybe even just so maybe he catches form and you can sell him for a little easier come the summer?
yeah, this feels like a case of like sticking with the keeper to regain his confidence and get some sort of value out of him. Like you don't want to go to the shopping window with the keeper on consecutive howlers and then ask for like 35 million for him, right? Like so you're hoping to justify what you want to ask for him. But at this point, you're almost like, do you just take that loss? Like, I don't know what the answer is there. I don't know what the backup looks like, but yeah, it's a spot. I think with Manchester United, like when Amorim came in and basically said this is the worst United side that they've ever seen, like when you do something like that and you take a page out of the Mourinho book a little bit there, like I feel like you really, really run a risk. You run a risk of either like you either have to know what you're doing and you hope that you're setting the right fire and the right butt and that things fall into place, or you have a risk of you risk ruining the entire like locker room and losing the entire side. And I feel like we saw a little bit of a response, but I feel like more we're seeing him losing this locker room. Maybe that's a good thing because there's enough pieces that need to leave it, and maybe that's part of the plan. And like he doesn't really care. But
I was kind of wondering if that part of that thing was like, let's see which players take offense to this and show up tomorrow and work harder in training.
yeah,
And let's see which players basically do this to me in the canteen. And everyone who does this, transfer committee, you can just cross their name right off the list. Like
yeah,
you can find the red tag in your locker. And we'll talk a little bit later about some players there and some movement and whether or not it'll change. So let's jump across the city. We'll go to the blue side of Manchester. They traveled down to Arsenal, though I think all 15 of the city supporters might question whether or not any of the actual first team 11 actually traveled for this match. So they lose it 5-1. I did the watch along with Glenn, the Brentford fan, and I gotta be honest, it wasn't an impressive performance by any means from Arsenal. I actually thought they were quite bland at times, and City almost made it really easy on them, especially the second half goals where it looked like once it went to 3-1, City just completely quit, which is just crazy to me to think a team with City's firepower. But I got to ask you, like, it's a huge match. Whether or not City was still considered in their mind still in the title race or not, we've had them written off for a while, but I don't think you can manage or play that way. How in the goddamn Christ is a fully fit Kevin De Bruyne not starting this match?
I mean, it just suggests to what we've kind of wondered all along. She just doesn't have it anymore, right? Like, I mean, we've seen it in spurts, but we've also seen it for not nearly the extended period of time we wanted to see it before he was back down with an injury. I think we'd see a matcher here where he'd pop up and be relevant. But listen, there's a reason that this side is struggling, and there's a reason they went out and bought Nico Gonzalez for like 50 million today, right? I mean, he's a central defensive midfielder coming out of Porto. Like, there's a reason they went and got that kid. We know what this side looks like. We've known for 2 years that the key part of this is Rodri and what happens when he's not there. But the fact of the matter is like they just need help all around. It's the midfield. I mean, they never really replaced Mahrez, which is why they went out and got Marmouche. And like, they've had these big transfers come in and not clip together. But like the bottom line is there's nothing really threading that defense and holding it together with that front line. And we knew that like, when they bought Holland, it was all going to run through him to some extent. And they just haven't had the pieces to be able to run that through them and then be good enough defensively. And we saw that. And like I think the big difference for me is when I saw the City side, I thought the Arsenal City game was dreadful. Like if you were watching it, it was not good football. And
I know. I did 2 hours of talking about everything but that match.
and then when you get into this, like I think the thing that really like was glaringly different to me with this City side is you saw a City side that went down and didn't really care. Like they didn't seem like they really were that interested. When they went down by 2, it was almost like they just mailed it in, which you just never would have seen before from that side.
Yeah, at 3-1, I thought, I mean, when they scored the goal to make it 1-1, I'm like, oh, it's a game again. Here comes City, because they were on the front foot for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Then to give up such a cheap goal, and to such a dirtbag, and Thomas Partey taking that goal. And I'm sorry, Arsenal fans, you can root for any player that they put in the jersey, and I would too. But you don't have to sing a player's name doesn't belong to be out of a federal jail cell in your country. So like really think about like taking the class road next time. But let's take a look at the table. You mentioned the European angle here and kind of the interesting piece. Chelsea wins today. They jump in to 4th place. City's in 5th, followed Newcastle, Bournemouth, Villa, all within 4 points. And of course, Newcastle tied on both goal difference and overall points. So it's just goals scored separating the two sides. I've asked you this before. I'm pretty confident Liverpool and Arsenal are both qualifying for top 4 at this point. Almost even starting to feel like it probably will finish 1-2 in some order there, with Liverpool most likely on top. Chelsea, City, which of those two would you think has the biggest chance of falling out of the top 5? And which of the bottom of the next 3 do you think has the best chance of getting into it?
I gotta tell you, man, I don't like Chelsea or City, either one of those teams, to finish there. Like I think if you're looking at this, I think Newcastle and Bournemouth have been in better form than both Chelsea and City. Like I liked Newcastle before this last weekend. I like them to get in there, but I think you look at Newcastle, Bournemouth, what they're playing with and how they're playing, and then you look at a Villa side that's added some really nice pieces this window, and it seems to starting to get this thing back on the rails. Um, I can't imagine either one of them stay there. I think if I'm picking one to drop, I'm probably picking over the duration. I think City can probably pick up more points than Chelsea.
Yeah, I feel like they've picked up enough key players and they've played a lot of big matches already in January and early February. They get Liverpool out of the way in a little bit. They've already had their Arsenal match. So I could see them going on where they get 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 wins and a draw in there. With that, I think they will finish ahead. I still think City will probably get to 3rd, because I do think there will be a period where Forest has a little blip. I do agree with the shout. I've said it before, and we'll talk a lot about it tonight on our podcast, which is why I skipped over it today. I mean, I've been talking about Bournemouth since October. Everyone else is just coming to the Bournemouth is the toughest side. I must have heard 50 times in the last 3 days how Liverpool just played their toughest match remaining on the schedule. And I love it because, they have to travel to City and they have Arsenal at home, and Bournemouth away was the toughest match, but it was a really grind. And I just think they give everybody a match, and they cause every single side, probably in all of Europe, problems with the way that they play. And they press so aggressively, and their team is so young. So I really like that Bournemouth side. I almost feel like the best thing for Bournemouth, though, is finishing 6th and getting into the Europa League and learning how to play European football and not going straight into Champions League knockout rounds. Not being able to probably strengthen in 1 year. Like, if you get into Europa, you might lose a player or two, but you might be able to convince a couple. I think if you get in Champions League, it could be like a one and done type of Newcastle season, and it may not be the best thing in the world. Plus, I'm really just in my heart of hearts rooting for City to finish 5th and then Spurs to go Spurs and win and go opposite Spurs and win the Europa League. So they kick City's 5th place out of Champions League and they have to go play in the Europa League. Like, how great would it be for City and those players to, maybe be playing in the championship and also have to spend midweeks traveling out to like the most random ass place in all of Europe, like we did on Thursday afternoons, where you had to get an almanac out so you could figure out where the fuck they were playing today. Like, what country is Liverpool traveling to today? Because I don't even know how to pronounce this side. But let's take a look at the bottom of the table. There's not much drama here, honestly, because with Everton's victories, I feel like we're down to just 3 from 4. I really don't believe that West Ham or Everton will get anywhere back near this relegation zone, in my opinion. There's even an argument that Wolves could string a couple results together after their victory against Villa, and this could just be done and dusted by like mid-April. Does Leicester or Ipswich have any hope? And do you give Southampton anything more than kudos and a slap on the back for going and getting 3 points this weekend, just purely so they dreadedly get away from that Derby record?
Yeah, sure. I think I just think this was such a bad loss for Ipswich, man. Like, they had to have points here. And it's not only that, they just didn't play particularly well. Like, I don't think that, like, the way they played versus Southampton, I didn't think they played that poorly throughout, even though the results haven't been there, right? Like, they've given some teams some matches and some issues, but it's just a really, like, that was the one spot in all of the fixtures that you had to have 3, and you went in and you laid an egg. You started nicely and laid an egg, and that was just, yeah, it's a bad loss. I don't see any of those teams. I think that's it. I think it's nailed in. I think this weekend, for me, solidified that bottom 3.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I got to tell you, if I'm Kieran McKenna, I'm wondering to myself, like, can I get last summer back? Can I take that phone call where United asked if I wanted to come in and interview for the job, and I told them no thanks because I'm going to see through my first season at Ipswich? And I understand he didn't want that shit job in that moment, and he's probably thought if I do a good job at Ipswich, I'll get an opportunity at that job eventually. But to think that Manchester United wanted to talk to you and you turned it down to stay there, and you're probably going right back into the championship, and I wonder if he honestly even survives the season, because at some point, don't those clubs, don't Leicester, don't Ipswich, don't they kind of have to go back into the well and at least try to break glass and see if you can find lightning in a bottle and find somebody that can give you an opportunity to get you back up? I mean, it just seems short-sighted to think to yourself, oh, Kieran McKenna took us 2 levels up, then got to the Premier League, proved he wasn't ready to manage in the Premier League, so we should bring him back to the Championship so he can go back to the Premier League and realize he's not ready for the Premier League. And maybe I'm just being harsh on him, but they look naive at times to the way they play. I mean, no one's dropped more points from winning positions than they have. Not just, point positions, winning positions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they haven't even taken the opportunities that they were given. So today was the end of the proverbial transfer window. So in classic American Scouser fashion, we bring out the real deal bullshit meter. And the beauty here is everything we actually talk about from here on out, Paul, actually occurred. You mentioned Villa, so let's start with the most active team in the Premier League. And I understand City bought players, but City bought players for the future. City bought bigger players. No side, in my opinion, shocked the rest of the league more than what Villa has done over the last week. So let's start with the big announcements from the weekend. Fabrizio Romano, I believe in this case, was actually first to report that Aston Villa had signed Marcus Rashford on loan with an option to buy. also coming to terms on a straight loan deal with Marco Asensio. Now, obviously, in all of this was the news that John Duran would be heading off to Saudi Arabia, in which I'm pretty sure Emery said, we're having a fucking pizza party tonight. And for anyone who doesn't know, John Duran has all the skill in the world, had a contract until 2030, and they basically tried to sell him to every single club. They just wanted to make sure that they got their price because the guy has every bit of Mario Balotelli like fireworks and negativity surrounding his off the field play. What are your thoughts on the rehabilitation that is Rashford, specifically when it comes to Marcus Rashford? I actually really like Villa as a destination because I like a manager like Emery having a kid like Rashford and maybe figuring out a way to get the best out of him. Because we all know there is a true class player. I'm not calling him world class, but there is a class player inside that body if he puts it all together.
It's kind of wild to think of like what we know of Marcus Rashford in terms of his philanthropic ventures. What he does for the community is so starkly contrasted by what you hear about him as a professional. It's very hard to reconcile the differences. Does a lot for the community, helps out, disadvantaged kids, stays out too late, doesn't apply himself, is in the right mindset come game time. That shit's hard to reconcile. I hope that this is a real sort of awakening for him in terms of I hope that this is the reset that he needs, because I think maybe sometimes you just get so used to a toxic work environment and the chaos that you just sort of disconnect from it and you don't apply yourself the way you really need to. I'm hoping that this is that for him. I hope that this is fresh water for him and that he can sort of reinvigorate his career, because despite being a United player, I like him as a guy and I think he seems like a good kid. I'd like to see him do well. So hopefully this is the change he needs.
I just find it hilarious that there was talk he's going to Napoli, he's going to AC Milan, he might go to Barcelona, and then there was this rumor that he was considering a loan to West Ham just so he could move back to London, and then people just out of nowhere it's oh, he's going to Villa. And I love the idea of United supporters waking up knowing that one of their own basically forced through a loan to a Premier League team was basically vilified in the press in all levels, and now wakes up and will probably be starting in the round of 16 in the Champions League in 2 weeks, which is just absolutely fucking comical in itself, and I am all here for it. Speaking of two other players who escaped the Europa Conference and found themselves at a Champions League club, David Ornstein reporting late today that Villa reached agreements with Chelsea to sign both Axel Diassi and playmaker João Felix. Now, neither of these have an option to buy, but there were rumors that there was a lot of negotiations. Villa's been trying to buy João Felix for a long time. This is the framework of if they do really well, you can come back in. But I think this is Chelsea making sure they protect that new business model, which is profiting on all players at all times as much as possible. What are your thoughts on these two moves? Because I feel like in João Felix, they get a maverick. No one has gotten the best out of him, but that might be because at the best and at his prime, when he was ready to be the biggest star in the world, he got sent to play for Diego Simeone as an attacking midfielder. And I feel like that could basically stunt anyone's growth. And what are your thoughts of Diassi? Because I've seen good from him and bad from him, both at Monaco and in his time at Chelsea. What are your thoughts here on what Villa did to strengthen the squad?
Well, I think the Saucy's I think that'll be interesting. I think he's got a little bit of man, he plays a little bit too high risk, low reward for me at times. To me, he takes chances that are unnecessary. But I also think that he's a player that looks for that explosive play. So I think he's just got to rein that in a little bit and be a little bit more disciplined. I think it's very, very difficult to evaluate center backs at Chelsea at times because they have such they're so disorganized all over the place. I think it's really ever since they lost Rudiger, it's been really difficult to find any sort of solidity there. I think it could be a good move. I mean, Villa has invested in this, right? But like they've invested in center backs, but they've had a difficult time keeping them healthy. So I think that's going to be the main thing. And then João Felix, I think the Serie A is a great league for him. Slows down that pace of play, allows him to play in a little bit more space. He's been essentially in football purgatory for like the last 3 years, so it'll be interesting to see.
It'll be interesting to see what he does at Villa. I think in the situation that he plays for Emery, he'll get. I don't think he'll be a starter at Villa by any means. I mean, when you have Morgan Rogers and Ramsey in the midfield, but I think if you are chasing a game, you need to break down a low block. If you're struggling to score, I think you can bring in a João Felix, and he has a bit of magic in him. Like he's not Martin Odegaard, but he can give you a Martin Odegaard like moment to help create something that maybe no one else currently in that Villa side, especially since they decided to loan out Emi Buendia during this transfer window. So another team that was very active, tried very hard to get different deals across the line. They had Diassi actually signed as well, but he decided to go to Villa, which I don't blame him because they're in the Champions League, was Tottenham Hotspur. A lot of clubs are claiming they're having injury crises. Tottenham can legitimately, I mean, they literally have been playing midfielders at center back. And this weekend they're starting like complete kids and we're forced to start Richarlison, which lets you know exactly how barren of talent they are. But they pull off a couple really good signings, in my opinion, this week. First, they basically pipped Wolves. Wolves was about to loan Kevin Danso from RC Lens. He's a solid center back, and they hijacked the deal right at the last minute. He jumped for the opportunity. He signed on a permanent deal. And then today, after all the reports that the kid had passed twice and he was looking at Arsenal and United, Arsenal thought they had the player, I guess, because he was flying to London, albeit they didn't realize he was flying to take a Spurs medical. They signed Matthias Tell, the young striker from Bayern Munich, highly rated. They get him on a loan. Originally was reported that it was a straight loan. Come to find out, it is not. He has agreed to a 6-year contract if they make his release clause fully committed. He can play wide as well. I really, really like this signing for Spurs. This is finally like Spurs making, like, I would have liked it if we made this move, to be totally honest. Like, I think is going to be a star. And I don't think he has to play every minute, but right now they need him to play. And I think it's a perfect marriage, him going to Spurs.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look at the profile for young attackers across Europe, there's probably not many players with a higher ceiling than this one. I think any of the top clubs would be happy with this. Arsenal, Liverpool, City. I think any one of those teams would shake your hand off if you offered him at that price for that contract. So yeah, it's a big time pickup by Spurs.
And I'm not saying if he hadn't gotten maybe the wages he wanted or the terms he wanted that he wouldn't have picked Arsenal or he wouldn't have gone to United. But anyone who doesn't think that kid hasn't been in training every single day watching the best player at his club, and we can all laugh about the mouth breather, but Harry Kane is still the best player at Bayern Munich right now. He's probably the best. He's the best striker in the Bundesliga right now. He's scoring boatloads of goals. They're winning. And you got to imagine if you're a 19-year-old kid and you're basically learning off Harry Kane every day, you're talking a bit about what it's like to live in London. You're talking a little bit about what those Spurs supporters are like. And you know, if Harry Kane got wind that this kid was considering these clubs, he's putting in all the calls. He's getting all the, it's like the recruiting trips in college, when you stop at a college campus.
Yeah.
If you already got the guy in your ear telling you how great the stadium is, the facilities are, life in North London is, this just makes total sense to me. Another couple deals that made a lot of sense to me. You mentioned one already. Let's start with that one. Nico Gonzalez to Manchester City. My only question will be, how will Nico Gonzalez feel next year when Rodri is back and he realizes Pep only plays one of them and it is Rodri, unless they have a good feeling that Rodri's seriously going to look at either Madrid or somebody else in the offseason and maybe is ready for that next step. I love this signing. You touched on it. He's a solid player. He'll fit in like, water to a duck, as they say. Brilliant signing by City, right? Pretty much in some ways, all four of their signings were really solid this January transfer window, if we're being unbiased and fair.
Yeah, and I think we talk about Rodri, but this move could have just as much to do with the state of De Bruyne as anything else. And I think this is a player that Pep knows really well. You can play him in multiple positions across the midfield. And this is a player that Pep knows from the Barca Academy days, like from the youth days. So he's very well aware of what this guy is, what he can do across the board. I think it's a really, really solid pickup for City and for what they need. We'll see.
And the last thing that we'll talk about here was one. I thought this was an interesting one because when Evan Ferguson bust onto the scene, not only did we hear about him a lot in our Discord channel because he was about to be yet another Irishman to spurn Ireland and start to play for England, but he stuck to his liberties. We'll see how far he goes with it because he's only made one appearance, so he still has the opportunity to switch. But we kid, guys. Evan Ferguson from Brighton going to West Ham. I love this move for West Ham. It is a straight loan deal, but I just have to feel like West Ham knows that if they do this right, they'll have an opportunity to sign this player. I think he fits that West Ham style better than he fits the current Brighton style. And I think that's why I'm so excited about it, because when you saw him play under Potter originally, when he made his debut, it looked like he was going to already be playing at a much bigger club by now. Injuries have set him back a bit, but having two additional managers during that period with two different philosophies didn't help a, hold up striker back to goal type of guy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because he looks so out of place in Brighton tactically, and then you bring him to West Ham and you're like, well, Graham Potter couldn't figure out how to do it in Brighton, and then he brings him to the new club. I think the indication is it obviously is a manager who fancies a player, and it shows you that what wasn't working at Brighton didn't have much to do with Potter or the player, but more to do with the players around them and how to get that to work, right? So he obviously sees something that he likes in tandem with the Jared Bowens and the Diabies and the pieces that they have there. So around him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here.
So if I asked you, the most active sides in the Premier League this year, this January, obviously were City, Villa. I think Villa made 5 signings, sold Duran, but arguably the most important piece of business they did was probably not selling Ollie Watkins to Arsenal. At the end of the day, it was probably as important of any player that they brought in. City brought in 4 new players, all of which by the end of the season could be starters, all of which I believe will be starters by next season, which is pretty good business as well, right? Who is the proverbial winner? Who's the proverbial loser in your mind when it comes to Premier League teams and sides this transfer window?
Oh, I think probably Villa, just because they were the most active here. I think it's ironic that both City and Villa are the 2 teams that did the most business here and probably under the most financial scrutiny as well. Villa has been, edging that line for a number of windows now. I think the big sale obviously helps them. I think the biggest piece about that, we talked about a lot of players. I think the Daniel Mullen piece of business is going to end up being a really, really good piece for them. I think he's got that. I think he's got the top end pace and physicality to be a frontline player for a lot of years in the Premier League. I also think that the Julio Soler acquisition for Bournemouth is going to fly under the radar. That has the potential to be a huge signing down the road. One of Argentina's big up and coming talents as built, and we'll see if he can live up to it. I think the big question for me is can he handle the pace of play and physicality of the Premier League? So we'll see. But I probably give it to Villa.
Yeah, I'd have to give it to Villa. I think they did the best work. There were other moves that happened. We couldn't touch on everything. Ben Chilwell finally got out of purgatory. I mean, he's no longer playing in the academy games at Chelsea. He's going to Crystal Palace on loan, which isn't a bad signing at all for Crystal Palace. I think that's a veteran presence that can really help you and do a job. Um, I think ultimately the big story for me is that once again, clubs like United, they dipped their toe in the water a little bit, but they weren't able to really make the signings they wanted to make because of their concerns over financial fair play or the PSR rules. I think the same thing is happening with Chelsea. They did make a signing today. I forget who it was. I think it's a South American teenager, of course, that'll probably go on 1,700 loans. He's probably already in Strasbourg as we speak, starting his first of 7 years worth of loans before he gets sold for the exact same dollar amount they bought him for, plus $1 so they can claim a profit. But let's take a look at the next round of fixtures coming up. Before this match takes place, of course, there will be a Merseyside derby between Liverpool and Everton to make up for the match that was canceled off in match week 15. Looking at the fixtures come Valentine's Day weekend, Paul, because we have a FA Cup weekend on the horizon before then. Which of these matches jump out at you? Is it Man City hosting Newcastle? Is it which of the Jekyll and Hydes between Spurs and United will show up? What jumps out at you here? What are you excited to watch? What maybe is something our viewers won't be excited to watch that they should pay attention to?
I think so. My eye immediately is drawn to the Tottenham United game, just kind of in a like sort of in one of those weird, like you're passing a car accident and you can't help but rubberneck kind of ways. Like I want to see what kind of nonsense happens there. I think the City Newcastle one is obviously the other one we're looking at, but I think the one that people are probably going to overlook that I think has the potential to be a great match and to sort of have some surprises in it is that Fulham Forest match. Both sides play really good football. Both sides very underrated in terms of like what we thought they'd be and how they're playing now and where they're ending up. Fulham hasn't had the consistency, but they can beat anyone on their day. So that I think that will be a really good one.
Yeah, the only other one, and just because of the storylines to it, now it would be interesting to know. Obviously, there'll be a result between them for them, but I think until the Moyes Assance at Everton really dissipates, I think people will pay attention. I mean, they literally have scored, what is it, 8 goals and conceded none and got 3 victories since the guy came back as manager, which is just absolutely stupid. But when you watch them, they don't look like the same Sean Dyche team. We used to say, like, there looks like there's more talent in this side than they utilize. And then you're like, oh, wow, this Mikolenko guy, if you actually send him forward and tell him to cross the ball, can create opportunities for strikers and for wingers to play. And you're like, oh, wow. And Sean Dyche is like somewhere like breaking out in hives because he's seeing people go into the attacking third. Like, what are you doing there, attacking midfielder? You're not supposed to be ahead of the ball. And I think it's just working. Obviously, there's some things that are really working out for him. And like usual, most times when things go good recently for Everton, it's coupled with Calvert-Lewin getting an injury. But they're finding ways to score goals. They're finding ways. And obviously the crowd's behind them. I mean, I'm intrigued, to be honest. I'm more nervous than I would have been mid-December to play a Sean Dyche side than I am a David Moyes side, because I remember how David Moyes can manage a team at Goodison, especially and arguably the biggest match Everton is going to play all year, which is the final time Liverpool will ever come to Goodison Park. And I don't think you can downplay the fact that this is the last one for them. And if you don't think, like, their supporters would be up for it regardless if they were still in the relegation zone, I think they come and they're ready for it. So it'll be interesting. By the time we have our show next, we'll probably do a little bit of a preview for that because we won't actually have any matches next weekend. So we'll talk a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit more about the season so far, the table, but more importantly, we will make sure and touch on the FA Cup as well. Maybe even sprinkle in how some of these players fared in their first round of fixtures in the Premier League. So, as always, thank you for viewing our show tonight. If you haven't already, as the kids would say, smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Bring a friend over if they haven't. Don't forget we have live programming Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern, as well as our Monday and Thursday night podcasts live at 8, our panel show on Tuesday, as well as all kinds of mixed content coming out throughout the week. So follow us on all the different areas. And for myself and Bickler, thank you for viewing. This is the Premier League Show. We'll be back next week. Have a great week.